The storm of civilization began in marble streets and blood-soaked sands. 2,000 years ago, the Romans built the richest empire on earth, and then bankrupted themselves with the same financial mistakes the modern world repeats today. They understood one eternal truth. Money is never neutral. It is a weapon, a promise, and a lie, all at once. Lucius Varro, a Roman philosopher and advisor to the Senate, once said, "Gold commands more loyalty than gods." And in Rome that was true. The people lived by unspoken rules, not written in law, but etched in survival, about how wealth, debt, and value truly worked. These were the rules no one taught in schools. They were learned through war, crisis, and collapse. They were the money rules of empire, the lessons that built Rome and the mistakes that destroyed it. By the 2nd century after Christ, Rome stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. It ruled over a quarter of humanity, more than 60 million people, united under one language and one currency. Its economy pulsed like a living creature. Ships carried grain from Egypt, glass from Syria, and silk from China. Markets buzzed with trade. The treasury overflowed with tribute from conquered lands. The citizens believed their money, stamped with the emperor's face, was eternal. At the heart of that faith was the Roman denarius, a small, shining coin that symbolized power and permanence. In the beginning, Roman money was solid, literally. Each coin had real weight, forged from silver and gold mined by laborers and struck by the state. When a Roman bought bread, he paid with something tangible, the condensed labor of miners, smiths, and soldiers. The denarius was not an abstraction. It was the empire's lifeblood made metal. But as Rome's borders stretched and its hunger for control deepened, that same money, the empire's strength, became its curse. The wealth of Rome didn't come from invention or productivity. It came from conquest. Every victory meant new mines, new slaves, new taxes. War paid for itself, as long as Rome kept winning. Then came the silence of peace, and the illusion began. When the conquest slowed, the empire's appetite didn't. Rome needed new ways to feed its promises. The state began to borrow, tax, and manipulate its currency to hide decline behind the mask of prosperity. Senators grew rich, generals richer still, while farmers and craftsmen were crushed under the weight of debt, inflation, and corruption. Even the wise could see the cracks forming. Varro warned the Senate that the republic's wealth has become its weakness. But few listened. The decline of trust had begun, and once trust fades, no army can defend an empire. The fall of Rome was not a single explosion but a long, quiet unraveling, the collapse of faith disguised as stability. Yet the Romans were not blind. Their greatest minds, philosophers, historians, and emperors, saw it happening in real time. Cato the Elder preached restraint, warning that a republic addicted to luxury would rot from within. Cicero wrote that greed corrupts a nation faster than any enemy. Seneca, the Stoic voice of reason, warned that wealth is the slave of the wise and the master of the fool. And Emperor Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, soldier, ruler, reminded his people that fortune was never freedom, only temptation. These were not sermons. They were postmortems, diagnoses of a dying economy. Rome's moral decay was its fiscal policy. The paradox was brutal. The more Rome grew, the more it consumed itself. The state became a machine of appetite, taxing the provinces to pay the legions, looting the conquered to pay the debt, minting coins to fund illusions. And stamped upon every coin, gleaming in every hand, was the quiet message that bound the empire together and led it to ruin. Your wealth exists because your ruler exists. Rome lived and died by that truth. The city of Rome shimmered under the Mediterranean sun. Marble, bronze, and ambition. Every market stall, every purse, every temple echoed with the same metallic rhythm, the sound of coins changing hands. And each coin bore the face of power itself. No one understood this better than Emperor Augustus, Rome's first true ruler after centuries of chaos. He knew that speeches fade, but symbols endure. When civil war finally ended and the republic lay in ashes, Augustus rebuilt not just the state, but belief itself. His weapon was not the sword. It was the coin. Across the empire, silver denarii flooded the markets, each stamped with his calm, divine face and a single Latin word: pax, peace. In a world exhausted by war, that promise was irresistible. Every transaction became propaganda. Every loaf of bread, Every amphora of wine, every soldier's pay whispered the same message. Rome is restored because Augustus wills it so. A century later, another ruler would use the same trick, but for darker reasons. Emperor Nero, desperate to erase his infamy after the Great Fire of Rome, minted coins that showed temples being rebuilt, cornucopias overflowing, and the goddess of abundance smiling over the ashes. The message was clear: Rome thrives, Nero provides. The people wanted to believe it. And so they did, even as smoke still lingered over the ruins. Under Emperor Trajan, the art of monetary theater reached perfection. Coins celebrated his victories in Dacia and Parthia, displaying conquered kings kneeling, heaps of gold, and triumphant standards. These were not decorations, they were headlines, proof that conquest still paid. Every denarius was a miniature empire, a pocket-sized promise of greatness. But beneath the polished silver, the illusion deepened. Coins no longer represented wealth, they manufactured it. The emperor's face was no longer a guarantee of value, it was a reminder of obedience. The message was silent but absolute. Your prosperity exists because your ruler exists. That's why every regime fought for control of the mint. To strike the coin was to write the story. Whoever made the money controlled the meaning. By the time Senator Gaius Varinius, a scholar of economics and one of Augustus' successors in spirit, addressed the Senate, even he could sense the danger. Our coins no longer weigh the empire's strength, he warned. They measure its vanity. But his words were swallowed by applause and denial. 2,000 years later, the actors have changed, but the stage remains the same. The Latin inscriptions are gone, replaced with English vows like "In God we trust." Central banks have replaced emperors, but their function is identical: to maintain faith through control. And when modern strongmen once again begin placing their faces on coins, it isn't nostalgia. It's ownership. Rome understood what the modern world pretends to forget: that money is never neutral. It is politics you can spend, faith you can mint, and control you can hold between your fingers. It was rule one of empire. All money is political. Rome's greatness was built not only on conquest, but on credit. Every layer of its society ran on borrowed money. Farmers borrowed to buy land and seed. Merchants borrowed to fund voyages across the sea. Even generals borrowed to raise armies, wagering their futures on victory. Debt wasn't a danger. It was the engine that kept Rome turning. But engines consume fuel, and eventually people became that fuel. When citizens defaulted, their land was seized. When they couldn't pay, they were sold into slavery. The Latin word obligatio meant both debt and bond. To owe was to be owned. By the late Republic, debt had wrapped around every class like a noose. Interests soared. Senators mortgaged estates. Families collapsed. Rebellions brewed in the countryside. Then came Julius Cassian, a rising general with a gambler's instinct and a genius for timing. When he seized power, his first act shocked the elites. He canceled a portion of all debts. Not from mercy, but calculation. Cassian knew that to rebuild power, he needed the people's faith. The policy worked. The streets calmed. The crowds cheered. Rome's economy stumbled forward, for a while. But debt, once tasted, is never forgotten. Each emperor who followed used it the same way: to buy loyalty, to delay collapse, to purchase another year of peace. Rome's gold glittered across the world, but the empire itself was broke, addicted to borrowing from its own future. Today we call it stimulus. Rome called it survival. And as Senator Varinius once said, the borrower does not serve the lender, he becomes him. That was Rule 2 of empire. Debt is power. In the beginning, Rome's greatness was built on discipline. Farmers who tilled their own fields, soldiers who fought without luxury, and leaders who prized duty over comfort. But as gold from conquered lands poured in, the Republic's virtue drowned in its own success. Wealth turned from tool to toxin. By the 1st century, senators competed not in honor but extravagance. They built marble villas filled with Greek statues, Egyptian jewels, and silks from the East. Banquets stretched till dawn, where roasted peacocks were served with feathers reattached, proof that vanity had replaced restraint. Among them, one voice still spoke against the tide: Marcus Cato, an aging statesman known for his simplicity. Walking through Rome's markets, he muttered, "Luxury is a sickness eating the bones of the Republic." Few listened. Most laughed. The disease spread quickly. The elite's obsession with indulgence infected the common people. Local craftsmen were ruined as imported silk replaced Roman wool. Gold drained from the empire, flowing east in exchange for pleasure. By the reign of Emperor Hadrianus, Rome's trade deficit had become a wound that no conquest could heal. The empire bled wealth, not through war, but through appetite. The philosophers warned again. Seneca wrote, "Poverty is not the absence of wealth, but the absence of desire." But the words echoed through halls lined with gold. Discipline vanished. Simplicity was mocked. And when the economy trembled, no one remembered restraint. Rome had mistaken comfort for culture, and when that happens, collapse is not an event. It's a schedule. That was Rule 3 of empire. Luxury is a virus. By the 3rd century, the empire's gold had faded to copper and its pride to panic. The Roman denarius, once the strongest currency on earth, had become a coin of lies. It began quietly. Emperor Nero reduced the silver content of the coin by 1/10, hoping no one would notice. But they did, and so did every ruler after him. Each emperor shaved away a little more truth from the money until the denarius was nothing but a hollow promise. Prices soared. Soldiers demanded pay in gold or grain. Merchants refused imperial coins. Ordinary citizens watched their savings vanish overnight. Inflation didn't just destroy wealth. It destroyed faith. In desperation, Emperor Diocletian tried to restore order with the edict on maximum prices, a decree setting limits on the cost of everything from bread to boots. But no law can control panic. Markets froze. People hoarded. The black market became the only real economy left. Rome had replaced trust with force, always the final stage before collapse. By the 4th century, the system had died. Taxes were collected in grain. Armies were paid in land. Cities emptied. Trade shriveled. The empire hadn't run out of money. It had run out of belief. Because money, any money, is only a story people agree to tell. When that story breaks, power breaks with it. The barbarians didn't destroy Rome. They merely walked into the silence that inflation left behind. In the ruins, a few thinkers like Lucius Varro's grandson, Marcus Varro, still wrote. "When we stopped believing in our coin," he said, "we stopped believing in ourselves." It was the same truth that echoes through every age, from the denarius to the dollar. When people lose faith in the system, no army, no emperor, no miracle can hold it together. Rome learned it too late. Its people traded silver for survival, truth for comfort, and in the end, power for illusion. That was Rule 4 and 5 of empire. Inflation destroys empires, and when people stop believing in money, they stop believing in power. And as the last Roman coin fell silent in the dirt, a new age began, one built not on wealth, but on memory.